She didn't call. She didn't ask. She sent a text, 6 lines long. No punctuation beyond a period at the end of her demand. Maddie, hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. Chris will be doing the family speech at the christening. Since it's mostly his side attending, I figured it made sense. Just sit quietly and stay out of the way. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand it the first time. I did. I just needed to let it settle. Like an old injury flaring back up in the middle of the night. Dull, but deep. She didn't mean to hurt me. That's what made it worse. This wasn't anger. This was arrangement. 10 years. That's what her silence was worth. 10 years of loaning her car money, of covering her emergency dental work, of helping her fix that termite-ridden apartment she insisted was a great find. 10 years of co-signing when her credit score scared lenders away. 10 years of holding her hand, and her mother's, while Maddie's biological father vanished into his 5th divorce and 3rd rehab. And now she had a new stepfather, Chris, a man she'd known 2 years and whose only contribution to her life so far had been a generic Christmas card and a monogrammed baby blanket. He would be the one giving the speech. Not me. Just sit quietly. That part stuck. It wasn't what she said. It was what it presumed, that my presence, my voice, was an inconvenience. A shadow cast over their moment. She didn't even ask if I was okay with it. She assumed I'd obey, that I'd play the extra. The man at the edge of the photo. I showed Carolyn the message. She read it, blinked once, then folded the laundry on her lap and said, "She just wants everyone to feel included." I stared at her, waiting for the part where she'd say, "But you've been there for her all these years." Or even a quiet, "That's not fair." But nothing came, not even a look. Just that same old marital neutrality, the way she always turned herself into fog when her children cut me down. I don't think it was cowardice. It was worse. I think she agreed. Later that night, I heard Owen in the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and stepped in just as he was digging through the fridge. His tone was flat, casual. "You heard about the speech, right?" I did. He didn't meet my eyes, just shrugged. "Makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you're just a paycheck. This isn't really your family." He said it like a fact, like gravity. And I realized then they didn't hate me. They just saw through me. My role had always been transactional. They hadn't said it before because it hadn't needed saying. I didn't argue. What would I say? That I'd sacrificed? That I'd paid for every car repair and college prep course and medical deductible that their real father forgot about? They knew. That was the point. They knew and still saw me as outside the frame. So I walked upstairs, sat at the edge of the guest bed where I kept my work laptop, the one I bought during the pandemic so I could stay on calls and still help run the house. Opened the banking app. There it was. The $3,200 deposit. Reserved 6 months ago for a hillside venue with a wraparound porch and full catering. Because Maddie had cried on my shoulder about wanting something beautiful and simple and full of warmth. I hit cancel. The refund came back faster than expected. The bank was eager to give me my money. I let it sit for a minute. Just watched the numbers adjust. Then I moved the exact amount down to the dollar into a locked educational trust account I had quietly set up for Lucas. My grandson, the only innocent one in this mess. He'd done nothing wrong except be born into a house full of silent debts and open wounds. The trust was airtight. Only he could access it when he turned 18. Not Maddie, not Chris, not even Carolyn. And I made sure the paperwork stated it plainly. Seated by legal guardian, not to be reassigned. I printed the documents, the refund confirmation, the trust declaration, the terms of disbursement, clean white paper, sharp black ink, authority without noise. I slid it all into a plain white envelope. Then I took a black marker and wrote 5 words on the front in block letters. Ask your real dad. No signature, no explanation, no threats. I placed it on the kitchen counter before anyone else woke up. Right next to the coffee pot. They saw it. Of course they did. It sat there all morning. A silent fracture in the middle of the morning routine. Maddie didn't say a word. Neither did Owen. Carolyn moved it once to wipe down the counter. then put it back without opening it. No one asked me what it meant. No one dared. And that said everything. The day of the christening arrived warm and dishonest. One of those early spring afternoons that pretends to be generous. Golden light, mild breeze, but underneath you can feel the rot. You can feel the way things are being concealed. We drove in silence. Carolyn had dressed carefully. Soft blue wrap, gold pin at the throat, light perfume. Costume for peace. I wore a black blazer over an old dress shirt, no tie. I didn't bother. That wasn't my role after all. Just the man who paid for everything but wasn't invited to speak. Lucas slept in his car seat. Maddie and Chris were already at the church, meeting guests, taking photos. When we pulled up, I could see them through the chapel windows, shaking hands, posing beside the baptismal font like they were royalty, and this was their coronation. Inside, it was all soft murmurs and click-clack heels. The kind of crowd that blends family with acquaintances and nobody really knows who belongs to whom. I took a seat near the back. Not out of bitterness, just practicality. Easier to leave unnoticed. The service began. Pastor David stepped up. A thin man with kind eyes and a spine that had seen real battles. He smiled as he welcomed everyone, offered a short prayer, and invited us to witness the dedication of a child to God and community. Carolyn sat beside me, her hands tight in her lap. Then came the moment. Pastor David said, "We now invite a family member to speak on behalf of the home, to offer words of hope and commitment on behalf of Lucas's future." Chris stood. His suit was expensive and ill-fitting. That new money awkwardness. He cleared his throat, held up a printed speech, and began. He talked about legacy, about values passed down, about how Lucas would grow up surrounded by strength and love and discipline. It sounded like a podcast script. Rehearsed, polished, hollow. Not a single story, not one memory, just cliches wrapped in borrowed wisdom. He hadn't even been around when Maddie went into labor. He wasn't there when Lucas stopped breathing for 40 seconds in the NICU, and I drove 3 hours through a storm to be at her side while his father was unreachable. But here he was, giving the speech, wearing the title. People nodded politely. Some smiled. He wrapped it up with a quote from a book I'm sure he hadn't read. The room stirred for applause. And then, Pastor David did something I didn't expect. He looked straight at me. Not a glance. Not a passing nod. He stared, full and deliberate, through the rows of people and said, "I'd like to invite Lucas's grandfather to say a few words, if he's willing." Silence. Even Carolyn flinched. I stood slowly, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to be sure that every eye saw me, that they understood the weight of this moment. I walked to the front, past Maddie's rigid posture, past Chris's frozen half-smile, and took the microphone from Pastor David with a small nod. No paper, no quotes. "I won't speak long," I began, "but I will speak honestly." I let the silence build. No one moved. I've known Lucas since the moment he existed. Not because of blood, but because of choice. I chose to be there. I chose to show up. I chose every time to answer the call when it came, and it came often. Maddie's real father wasn't always reachable, so I stepped in, quietly, repeatedly, without demand. I turned slightly, not to face Maddie, but just enough that she knew the words were for her. Sometimes we confuse titles for presence. We assume the person with the microphone must be the person who matters. But anyone can write a speech. Anyone can recite words that sound good in rooms like this. What matters, I think, is who carries the load when no one is watching. I paused. Lucas will grow up and decide for himself what a father is, what a family is. He'll choose. But I know what I've done, and I know what I haven't. I haven't asked for praise. I haven't asked for recognition. I looked directly at Pastor David. But I'm grateful deeply for the chance to say this out loud, just once. I handed him back the mic, walked back to my seat. The room didn't applaud. It breathed. After the service, the parish hall began to fill with noise again. Coats being retrieved, conversations reigniting. I walked to Maddie. She stood stiff by the refreshment table, half a smile plastered on her lips. I didn't ask him to do that, she said quickly. I held up my hand. Don't. You don't owe me an excuse. Then I handed her 2 envelopes. The first was labeled Lucas Educational Trust. Inside was the legal confirmation of the account, the amount, the disbursement rules, the clause that ensured no one could touch it but him. The second was thicker. It held the refund confirmation from the venue, the breakdown of every dollar I had initially placed into the catering and location costs, along with a short note at the bottom. Redirected for clarity. Maddie opened the first. She didn't cry. Not right away. Just stood there, the papers trembling in her fingers. She reached for the second and scanned it, her mouth parting. The lunch, she began. Isn't happening, I finished. Not at my expense. She looked at me not with anger, but with that first flicker of recognition. That maybe the man she thought would always just eat the disrespect had decided to taste silence instead. I didn't mean to. You didn't think, I said. And that's worse. She nodded, small, ashamed. But I didn't wait for more. I walked past Owen, who was already eyeing the papers with suspicion, and out the side door of the church. The sunlight hit like absolution. I didn't need to be celebrated. I didn't even need to be heard. I needed only this, for the lie to end. They wanted to erase me quietly. I chose to correct them quietly. It was supposed to be a catered lunch. The guests lingered near the fellowship hall doors, clutching their coats and half-hearted smiles. Women in soft florals. Men loosening ties. There was an expectancy in the air. Where's the food? Where do we sit? Who's in charge? But no answers. Just a folding table with 1 tray of grocery store cookies and a half-gallon of lukewarm cider. No linens. No music. No paid staff hurrying around with trays of hors d'oeuvres. They noticed. They all noticed. Carolyn stood by the windows, arms crossed, scanning her phone. She wasn't looking at messages. She was avoiding eye contact. Maddie hadn't moved. She was still holding the envelope. I watched the quiet collapse unfold from a bench outside the hall. It didn't take long for whispers to bloom. Someone asked where the lunch was. Someone else muttered that the caterer must have canceled. A third said they thought it was odd there was no seating chart. But no one approached me. That silence, it was a boundary I had purchased with 10 years of invisible sacrifice. And then Pastor David came out. He sat next to me without speaking. Hands clasped, feet still. After a moment, he said, "You spoke like a man who had nothing left to lose." I nodded. "I didn't do it for applause," I said. "I know," he answered. "That's why it landed." We sat like that a while, 2 men in pressed shirts watching a party evaporate in real time. Then he stood, gave me a long look, and walked back inside. I heard him speak, clear and firm. "Friends, it seems today's celebration won't follow the original plan. But if there's one thing God has shown us, it's that grace can make room where structure fails. There's a kitchen in the back. And I suspect we have enough love in this room to feed a family without a single caterer." What happened next wasn't planned. It was human. One woman, a mother of 3 from the choir, disappeared and returned 10 minutes later with a crock-pot of pulled pork from her fridge. Another brought paper plates from her trunk. Someone found a Bluetooth speaker in the youth room and played soft gospel piano through a phone barely holding a charge. A celebration emerged. But not the one Maddie had imagined. This one was smaller, more real. People began laughing. Not the polite kind, but the ugly, warm kind that spills out when no one's being watched. A teenage boy dragged in 2 folding tables from the adjacent classroom. Someone's grandfather opened a bag of chips with the same reverence others reserve for communion. Even Chris helped. He rolled up his sleeves, grabbed a stack of folding chairs, and arranged them without being asked. He didn't speak to me, not yet, but he looked at me once. And nodded. It wasn't deference. It wasn't guilt. It was understanding. The kind men exchange when they both realize the script has been burned and there's nothing left but the scene. Maddie approached sometime after the casseroles appeared. She wasn't crying yet, but her mascara was starting to crack. "I wanted him to feel included," she said. I looked up. "He's new. He doesn't know the history." I thought you'd just get it. Like you always do. That part landed hard. Like I always do. She'd grown so used to me swallowing pain that she'd confused it with patience. I said nothing. She reached into her purse and held up the trust papers. You really did this? For Lucas, I said. Not for you. Not against you. Just for him. She looked away, eyes glassing over. You could have told me. I raised my eyebrows. Would you have listened? She blinked, swallowed, said nothing. Then Carolyn came over, slowly, like someone approaching an open flame. Her voice was careful, as if each word had to be measured for weight. You were right to be angry. I didn't reply. I let the silence fill the gap between us. He's not asking to be the star, she added, looking at Maddie now. He's asking not to be deleted. That word. Deleted. That's what it was. They hadn't punished me. They hadn't screamed or accused or blamed. They just erased. Quietly. Efficiently. As if I were a contractor whose services had expired. I looked around the room. Plastic chairs. Paper plates. Half-warm food in mismatched containers. And laughter, the genuine kind. The kind that says, we survived the mess, and we're still here. It wasn't the party we paid for. It was the one we earned. People began to approach me, one by one. A retired woman who'd seen me hauling supplies during church renovations. A young father who remembered I'd paid for his son's choir uniform when funds came up short. No speeches, just small nods, small acknowledgments, the kind that cost nothing but carry weight. Even Chris came over. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't apologize. He just looked at me and said, you did what needed to be done. It wasn't approval. It wasn't surrender. But it was true. And truth at that moment was enough. Lucas, still in his baptismal gown, was passed from arm to arm like a sacred thing. He giggled, reached for people's hair, drooled on expensive sleeves, oblivious to the moral weight hanging in the air around him. Good. He deserved that kind of ignorance, the kind that comes from being loved by too many people rather than too few. I took a step back from the table, watched the swirl of noise and motion, watched Maddie smile, then look at me, then smile again, weaker but real. I didn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I had redrawn the boundary. And for the first time, I think she saw it. Not as a threat. Not as a punishment. As a fact. They thought I was a blank check with legs. Now they knew the truth. I was a man with edges. And I had finally remembered where I ended. Later that night, long after the last guest had gone and the folding chairs were stacked crooked against the church walls, I sat alone in the car with the envelope still in my jacket pocket. It was heavier than paper should be. Not because of the documents, those were light, but because of what they replaced. I looked at it once more. White, clean, marked in permanent black ink. Ask your real dad. I thought, for a moment, about tearing it up, letting the symbolism end there. A gesture returned to ash. But then I realized it wasn't for them. It never had been. It was for me, because for years I had been living a contradiction. Giving like a father, sacrificing like a husband, but always waiting for permission to exist. I was never officially invited to the family, just absorbed, slowly, like a stain. And that kind of love, the kind you have to earn twice and justify forever, it changes you. Not quickly, not loudly, but inch by inch like erosion. You begin by staying quiet during small insults. You excuse being forgotten. You forgive being sidelined. Until one day, you're standing outside a church you paid for, holding an envelope that proves your worth only after it's been denied. That night, at home, the house was too quiet. Lucas had gone with Maddie and Chris. Carolyn hovered in the kitchen, rearranging already arranged things. The sound of ceramic against granite. Cabinets open just to be closed again. She didn't speak. I didn't either. We moved like two people on opposite ends of a rope that had gone slack. Finally, she said, "You embarrassed her." I looked up. Her voice wasn't angry, just resigned. "I didn't mean to," I said. "I know. But I didn't stop it either." She nodded. Slowly. "You drew a line. I watched her pour a glass of water she didn't drink. She needed to see it, she said. We all did. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from her. Not an admission, not a reckoning, just a fragile agreement that something had shifted. That maybe I hadn't been mad, just tired of being erased. The next morning, I left the envelope on Maddie's doorstep. Not the trust papers. She'd kept those. And not the cost breakdown. She'd already memorized every number on that page. Just the envelope. 5 words. Black ink. Clean lines. Ask your real dad. She didn't message me. Didn't call. But 2 days later, I received a notification. The trust fund had a new contributor. $250. Labeled, "From Grandpa Chris." A gesture. Small, but deliberate. And then silence. The kind of silence that speaks. Owen stopped texting altogether. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe because silence was easier than apology. I didn't chase it. I didn't miss it. And Carolyn, she became cautious. Not defensive. Not distant. Just careful. Like she had finally realized I could walk away. Because the truth they never considered was this. I didn't need to be loved. I needed to be respected. And respect doesn't come from biology or tradition or convenience. It comes from recognition, from truth, from being seen as the man who was there when no one else stepped up. They had mistaken my patience for permanence, my generosity for agreement, my silence for consent, but no more. Pastor David called a week after the christening, just to check in. We spoke for 10 minutes about nothing. Weather, budget meetings, a leaky roof in the youth annex. Then he paused. You did the right thing, he said. I didn't respond. He continued, most men in your position, they either vanish or scream. You did neither. You stood. Quietly. That kind of clarity leaves a mark. I thanked him. We hung up. That night, I sat in my office and looked through old files. Tuition invoices. Therapy receipts. Birthday invitations addressed to Mom and Carolyn, with my name scribbled in later, like an afterthought. All those years, I had believed that the investment would one day yield love. I realize now I was buying respect and being charged interest. Lucas will grow up. He'll hear versions of this story. Maybe Maddie will soften it. Maybe Chris will exaggerate his role. Maybe Carolyn will pretend it all smoothed out. But one day, when he's old enough, he'll ask, why did Grandpa stop paying for the party? And someone, maybe Maddie, maybe me, will hand him that envelope. He'll open it, read the 5 words, and he'll understand what no one else could say. There's a difference between being present and being used, between being family and being convenient. And maybe he'll ask himself the same question I've carried for years. Was I wrong to draw the line? Or was it the only language they ever respected? A folder, a trust, and a priest who saw everything? No one ever opened the envelope in front of me. But they opened something else that day. A silence they couldn't unsee.